A woman was killed on an empty train car, with no one else going in or out. A mysterious deadly illness that defies diagnosis. A missing man was found at the top of a 10-foot pile of coal. In each case, someone died, but the exact circumstances of their death defy explanation. Was it an assassin? Alien abduction? No one can say for sure, but many have certainly tried. Today, we're taking a look at some of the most bizarre, compelling, mysterious deaths that we just can't explain. Number 1. Alexander the Great. Alexander III of Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great, conquered lands from Macedonia to Egypt, Greece, and parts of India. But he couldn't conquer whatever mysterious health condition killed him at the age of 32. After returning to Babylon from an unsuccessful campaign in India, Alexander was not feeling great. After a night of drinking, he came down with a fever that grew worse and worse as the days wore on. Eventually, all he could do was lie in bed. 10 days after the fever first came on, he was dead. Other accounts report a sudden sharp pain in his abdomen, and most accounts agree that Alexander's body did not show any signs of decay for 6 days after his death. To witnesses at the time, this was evidence that Alexander was more than a mere man, and he possessed some godlike powers. Today, his death is the source of spirited debate among medical professionals and historians. At the time of his death, no one suspected Alexander was poisoned. However, he had accumulated plenty of enemies during his lifetime, any of whom might have had good reason to poison him. Graham Phillips suggested in his book, Alexander the Great: Murder in Babylon, that it could be strychnine poisoning. However, this poison does not cause a fever and causes convulsions, which were not described in any accounts of Alexander's death. Leo Shep suggested hellebore, which could have been mixed with wine. Some historians have suggested necrotizing pancreatitis, while others have brought up the possibility of West Nile virus or malaria, which he could have picked up on his travels. There is one other potential explanation that has gained traction in recent years, one that would be especially troubling. Dr. Catherine Hall, a senior lecturer at the Dunedin School of Medicine at the University of Otago, New Zealand, proposed that the paralysis described during his illness is indicative of Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological disorder. She additionally raised the possibility that as the paralysis progressed, his breathing became less apparent. This led to his doctors declaring him dead, when according to her theory, he was still alive. She believes that he may have been alive during those 6 days during which he did not show any signs of decay. His death may have been the most famous case of pseudo-thanatos, or false diagnosis of death, ever recorded. Number 2. Natalie Wood. Hollywood is filled with mysteries that rival those seen on the silver screen. One of the most enduring Hollywood mysteries is the death of the beloved actress Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, the 43-year-old Natalie Wood was found floating face down in the ocean off the coast of Catalina Island. At the time, the death was ruled accidental, attributed to a combination of drinking and her inability to swim. However, in 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation after years of speculation that her death could have been the result of a homicide. In 2013, her cause of death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Some of the details that muddied the waters of her death included bruises on her arms and knees, as well as a scratch on her neck, indicating she might have been attacked before she drowned. It is also difficult to get a clear picture of the events of November 28, 1981, with conflicting statements regarding whether she had argued with her husband, Robert Wagner, on the yacht where she was last seen before disappearing. Some detectives had suggested that Wagner knew more about the incident than he let on while talking to authorities, but his attorney has vehemently denied this, despite the new concerns raised by the reopened investigation and a great deal of pressure from the true crime enthusiasts. The department was not able to determine whether Natalie Wood's death was indeed the result of a crime or just a tragic accident. Number 3. Zygmunt Adamski. In June 1980, a 56-year-old miner named Zygmunt Adamski vanished from his home in Tingley, West Yorkshire. 5 days later, Adamski's body was found at a coal yard in Todmorden, 5 miles from his home. The body was on top of a 10-foot-high pile of coal, and he was wearing a suit, but his shirt, watch, and wallet were missing. His hair had been cut short, but the most unusual thing about Zygmunt Adamski's body was that it was covered in burn marks on the head, neck, and shoulders. The burns were covered in some sort of ointment, but their exact nature could not be identified. Alan Godfrey, the police officer who arrived on the scene, said that Adamski's face was frozen in an expression of absolute horror. "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had the look of someone who had seen something or someone that had scared him to death. According to BBC Inside Out, James Turnbull, the coroner who examined Adamski's body, considers it to be the biggest mystery of his career. One of the most bizarre aspects of the body, aside from its location and the burns, was the fact that Adamski had only 1 day's worth of beard growth, despite having been missing for 5 days. The case was filled with unanswered questions and riddles that would never be solved. Where was he when he was missing? What killed him? And how did he get on top of that coal pile? Some blamed Adamski's family. Others pointed their fingers at the KGB. There were even those who attributed the disappearance and death to alien abduction. Whether Adamski was taken by foreign intelligence, an ordinary enemy, or something altogether inhuman, we will likely never know exactly what happened. Number 4. Dr. Gilbert Bogle and Margaret Chandler. In the early hours of the morning on New Year's Day, 1963, 2 boys were walking near the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia, and spotted a man lying face down on the ground. At first glance, they thought he was just another partygoer from the night before who had a bit too much to drink and passed out. But when they walked by the area again an hour and a half later, they saw that his face had turned purple. They called the police, who arrived on scene to find the man naked from the waist down, with his suit trousers placed over his lower half and covered by a carpet. His name was Dr. Gilbert Bogle, and he was dead. 10 meters away on the riverbank, they found another half-naked body, this one belonging to a woman named Margaret Chandler. Both pairs of underwear were found nearby. Margaret and Dr. Bogle had clearly come here together. This was rather scandalous, as the two were married, and not to each other. The authorities had never seen anything like this, a couple sneaking off to the lover's lane by the river, getting halfway undressed, and then being interrupted by something that left them both dead. Neither of them were injured, and nothing unusual turned up in the autopsy. No distinct cause of death could be determined, leaving the authorities with their best guess. Suspicion first fell on Jeffrey, Margaret's husband, but not only did they turn out to have an open marriage, but he was with his own girlfriend all night. The presence of vomit and excrement near the body suggested poison might have played a part, and that the burden of finding some evidence fell on the toxicologist. But they could not determine anything other than one fact: whatever killed one killed the other, and at the same time. The 2006 documentary Who Killed Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler suggested another possibility: asphyxiation from hydrogen sulfide in the river. This toxic gas, which was emanating from the mud due to the dumping of waste in the area, was identified by a Maritime Services Board called to investigate the pollution. The gas is heavier than air, and it would have been more present at ground level. If someone was lying in it, they could asphyxiate and die without realizing what was happening. Still, that's just one theory of many, and the precise cause of Bogle and Chandler's deaths may never be uncovered. Number 5. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart is one of the most famous pilots and women in history. She's remembered for her aviation records and for being the first female pilot to fly alone across the Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, that's not all she's famous for. On June 1, 1937, she and her navigator Fred Noonan left Oakland, California for their transcontinental flight. While flying over the Pacific Ocean, Earhart and Noonan's plane disappeared. No one could locate any trace of them or their plane, and Earhart was declared dead on January 5, 1939. No definitive conclusions about Earhart's fate have ever been reached, but of course there have been plenty of theories, some more realistic than others. One theory posits that Earhart was a spy for the US government and was taken prisoner by Japanese forces while trying to collect intelligence. Another more widely accepted theory is that Earhart and Noonan reached the island of Nikamuroro and died there. A heel from a woman's shoe, an aluminum panel, and a piece of curved glass have all been found on the island. These might have belonged to Earhart and her plane, but we may never know for sure. Number 6. Charles Francis Hall. In 1870, Charles Francis Hall led an expedition to the North Pole. The team received $50,000 from Congress, and their ship Polaris left Connecticut on July 3, 1871. As the ship continued north, tensions brewed among the crew, particularly between Hall and the sailing master, Sidney Buddington, as well as a doctor and natural scientist, Emil Bessels. In October, Polaris came to a stop. In November, after a 2-week scouting expedition, Hall returned to the ship and drank a cup of coffee. He quickly became ill and accused the other officers of poisoning him. On November 8th, he was dead, buried in a shallow grave. The remaining crew would never reach the North Pole, as Captain Buddington had run the Polaris aground. After the crew members returned to New York, the Navy Board of Inquiry investigated Hall's death and determined that he had died of apoplectic seizure. But in 1968, Chauncey C. Loomis, who was writing a biography of Hall at the time, traveled to his grave. There he was able to take samples of hair and fingernails and have them tested. The tests showed an intake of considerable amounts of arsenic by C.F. Hall in the last 2 weeks of his life. Loomis wrote that if Hall was murdered, Emil Bessels is the prime subject. However, arsenic was also found in many medicines during that time period, and it's entirely possible that if Hall was poisoned, he unknowingly did it to himself. In both cases, those ifs are doing a lot of heavy lifting. Number 7. Dyatlov Pass hikers. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers led by Igor Dyatlov trudged into the Ural Mountains in Russia. One of them had to turn back after a medical emergency, but the remaining 9 continued, planning to send word back after 3 weeks. On February 20th, no one had heard from the group, and a search party was sent out to look for them. When the search party finally tracked down the missing hikers, they found a gruesome scene. 5 of the hikers' bodies were spread out across the snow in various states of undress. One was missing part of his own knuckle, which appeared to have been bitten off, perhaps self-inflicted. After the snow melted, the final 4 bodies were found. Their injuries were equally bizarre. One of the hikers had a twisted neck, one had a fractured skull, 2 were missing their eyes, and 1 was missing her tongue. It was clear at first glance that they had died from hypothermia, and the snow that had collapsed their tent was from some sort of compelling natural force. But the plot soon thickened. Some of the hikers' clothing contained traces of radiation, leading some to speculate that weapons testing had been involved in the disaster that killed them. Other theories have included the CIA, the FBI, Yetis, aliens. But the most plausible theory, a slab avalanche that fell on the tent. However, slab avalanches usually occur at steeper inclines than the one in Dyatlov Pass. So even though the slab avalanche theory is a compelling possibility, the case is far from closed. Number 8. Letitia Toureau. Fans of the murder mystery genre might be familiar with the trope of the locked room murder, which, as the name implies, occurs in a locked room with no apparent way for the killer to get in or go out. It's ordinarily the stuff of fiction. But in 1937, the Paris Metro's first-class car saw a locked room murder that was all too real. Letitia Toureau was a 29-year-old Italian immigrant who had lived in Paris for over a decade. She was a widow who had once been married to a high-society man, Jules. Jules kept her a secret during their 6-year marriage, and his parents only learned of her existence after his death. Letitia had secrets of her own, too. She was a double agent, working with the Paris police to infiltrate La Cagoule, a fascist terrorist group. Before her death, La Cagoule began to expect Letitia was a mole. On her last night alive, Letitia boarded the Paris Metro for the ride home, sitting alone in a first-class car at the Porte de Charenton station. The next stop, Porte Doré, was 45 seconds away. By the time the train reached that stop, Letitia Toureau was on death's door. She was on the floor with a 9-inch knife in her neck and died on the way to the hospital. According to the train driver, she was the only one in the metro car. It is possible that La Cagoule sent Jean Filiol, one of their assassins, after her. But if that was the case, how did he get into the train car without being seen, stab her in the neck, and escape, all in only 45 seconds? It's like something out of an Agatha Christie novel, but without Hercule Poirot arriving to provide a neat explanation before the final page. Number 9. Elisa Lam. Few modern unsolved deaths have drawn as much wild speculation as the tragic disappearance of Elisa Lam. On January 31, 2013, the 21-year-old Elisa Lam vanished from the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. When her parents didn't hear from her, they contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. No one could find any trace of Elisa until they checked the security footage. The video showed Elisa acting strangely in one of the hotel's elevators. She stepped into the elevator and pushed all of the buttons, and then began to step in and out of the elevator, peeking out into the hallway. In the final part of the footage, she could be seen standing near the left side of the door, gesticulating wildly and appearing to have an intense conversation with someone who was not in the frame. 2 weeks after the video was published, hotel guests began to complain about low water pressure and a strange, unpleasant taste in the tap water. A maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez investigated the source of the problem and found Elisa Lam's body floating in a hotel water tank. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, but many questions were left unanswered. How did she get into the tank in the first place? Was she alone? The autopsy did not show any signs of foul play, and it's highly possible that Elisa was suffering from a mental health crisis. but it would have taken a great deal of effort for her to wind up in a water tank if the drowning was self-inflicted. To reach the tank that she was found in, Lopez had to take the elevator to the 15th floor and walk up a staircase to the roof. He had to turn off the rooftop alarm and climb onto a platform where the water tanks were kept. Next, he had to climb another ladder to reach the top of the main tank. It would have been difficult for Elisa to reach this location without setting off an alarm or drawing any attention to herself. Elisa Lam's death is far from the only dark mystery attached to the Cecil Hotel. The building has seen more than its fair share of deaths and supposed hauntings, as well as serial killers, such as Richard Ramirez. The story of Elisa Lam is one of the many horrors seen by the Cecil Hotel that will likely never be explained. Number 10. The South Pole Poisoning. In May of 2000, a 32-year-old astrophysicist named Rodney Marks was walking from a research building to the main base of the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station when he suddenly began to have difficulty breathing. His vision began to blur, and he felt a rush of intense fatigue. He went to bed hoping a good night's sleep would help. But at 5:30 a.m., he woke up vomiting blood. Throughout the day, his symptoms only worsened, his joints ached, his eyes were incredibly sensitive to light, and he became increasingly distressed to the point of hyperventilation. The station doctor gave him an antipsychotic to calm down. It didn't help. Marks went into cardiac arrest and was declared dead at 6:45 p.m. on May 12, 2000. Dr. Thompson believed the death to be the result of unknown but natural causes. The rest of the researchers at the base would have to wait until the body could be collected for an autopsy if they wanted more answers. Marks's body was kept in the base's storage, where the cold preserved the condition of the corpse. On October 30th, a plane was finally able to carry the body to Christchurch, New Zealand, where Dr. Martin Sage performed an autopsy. It was then that he made a startling discovery. Marks had not died of natural causes. He had ingested 150 milliliters of methanol, a sweet, colorless, and toxic type of alcohol used to clean scientific equipment at the base. The dose he had consumed was fatal. This left only a few possibilities, none of them pleasant. Marks could have killed himself, but his colleagues rejected that notion. But if he hadn't poisoned himself, then someone else was responsible. In 2008, coroner Richard McElray released a report that said it could not be determined one way or another whether the death was the result of foul play. Marks had no enemies at the station, as far as anyone knew, nor did he have a reason to attempt suicide. No suspect has ever been identified, and Antarctica remains a continent that has never seen a murder trial. Number 11. Karen Silkwood. On November 13, 1974, Karen Silkwood was discovered deceased in her car near Crescent, Oklahoma. Silkwood, a chemical technician and an advocate for labor unions, appeared to have collided with a culvert, resulting in her death. Initially deemed a straightforward case of falling asleep at the wheel, questions lingered. Silkwood had been employed at the Kerr-McGee Cimarron fuel fabrication site, where she manufactured plutonium pellets for nuclear reactor fuel rods. Concerned about workplace safety, she joined the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. In July 1974, she discovered she had been contaminated with plutonium, and it turned out that she was the only person in her lab to test positive. Convinced this was no coincidence, she delved deeper into Kerr-McGee's practices, uncovering health violations, worker contamination, and unsafe equipment. Amid mounting stress, her doctor prescribed Quaaludes. Undeterred, Silkwood persisted in her efforts to expose corruption within the company. On November 5, 1974, during a routine self-check, she found almost 400 times the legal limit of plutonium in her body. She was sent home, and her plutonium levels continued to rise. The company accused Silkwood of poisoning herself, and an investigation found high levels of radiation in her home. Silkwood was terrified, believing that the company was trying to kill her. On November 13th, she drove to Oklahoma City and met with New York Times journalist David Burnham, as well as a union leader. She had a binder full of evidence which she took with her on her way to a union meeting. She was finally going to blow the whistle on Kerr-McGee, but she never got the chance. After her crash, the documents had seemingly vanished from the car. Police determined that Silkwood was asleep at the wheel and under the influence of Quaaludes, but her family, friends, and private investigators disagreed, pointing to skid marks as evidence that she was awake during the crash. The precise details of Silkwood's death, and whether it was a drug-induced accident or corporate assassination, are unknown to this day. Number 12. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue is regarded by many as the first detective story. His writing is famous for spinning dark tales of death, vengeance, and mystique. However, there is one mystery associated with Poe that he had no hand in writing: his own death. On October 3, 1849, Poe arrived at a Baltimore tavern looking worse for wear. He was dazed and confused, dressed in what appeared to be someone else's clothes. A local doctor was notified and Poe was admitted to a nearby hospital. He was delirious, hallucinating, and calling out for a still unidentified Reynolds. On October 7th, he died, and a Baltimore newspaper reported his cause of death as congestion of the brain. This is just vague enough of an explanation to invite numerous theories in the years since his death. Some believe that his death was alcohol-induced. Biographer E. Oak Smith posed a theory in 1867 that Poe was beaten until he suffered from swelling of the brain. In 1999, public health researcher Albert Donay proposed that Poe died from carbon monoxide poisoning, caused by the coal gas used for indoor lighting in the 19th century. In a similar vein, Chris Sempner, curator of the Poe Museum in Richmond, has suggested mercury poisoning as a possibility, which would explain Poe's hallucinations prior to death. Other popular theories include a brain tumor, influenza, and even murder at the hands of his fiancé's brothers. While some theories have gained more traction than others, it is likely that the mystery of Poe's death shall be solved nevermore. Number 13. Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. It was January 1947 at around 10 in the morning, and Betty Bersinger was pushing her daughter's stroller through Leimert Park in Los Angeles when she stumbled onto a horror show. There was a naked woman's body cut at the waist, lying on the ground next to the sidewalk. The sides of her mouth were carved into a permanent smile. An autopsy determined that the woman had died from blows to the face and blood loss. The cuts to her face and bisection of her torso mercifully had happened after her death. The woman was identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, known to some as the Black Dahlia, a reference to her love of black dresses and the recent film The Blue Dahlia. The name quickly caught on, and soon the press was spreading the word about the Black Dahlia murder. The police found it difficult to pin down a subject. One potential killer, Robert Manley, had an alibi that checked out. Then an envelope containing Short's belongings, such as her birth certificate, social security card, and address book, was mailed to the examiner's office. A botched investigation of another suspect, Leslie Dillon, led to a lawsuit against the city. Dozens of writers and amateur sleuths had attempted to crack the case over the years, but Elizabeth Short's killer, the person capable of committing such a brutal crime and staging that horrific display, has never been found. Number 14. Lily Lindstrom and the Atlas Vampire. We've seen unsolved deaths surrounded by speculation about ghosts, aliens, even a Yeti. But what about a vampire? Odd as it may seem, the details of one infamous unsolved Swedish murder earned it the nickname the Atlas Vampire Murder. In 1932, a concerned woman named Minnie Jansen called the police about her downstairs neighbor, Lily Lindstrom. She hadn't heard from Lily and was growing concerned. Lindstrom was a sex worker who saw clients in her apartment, and Minnie was worried something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, she was right. When the police entered the apartment, they found Lily naked, face down on the bed, and dead. The cause of death was from head trauma with repeated blows from a blunt object. That was bad enough, but most of Lily's blood had been drained from her body. Saliva was found on the neck and the body, and that, along with a blood-stained ladle, led authorities to fear that the assailant had decided to drink Lily's blood. Authorities interrogated her clients, but none confessed, and they never found her killer or what happened to all that blood. Number 15. JonBenet Ramsey. One of the most shocking murder cases in recent history is that of 6-year-old pageant princess JonBenet Ramsey, who was found strangled to death on December 26, 1996. From the beginning, the case has been shrouded in mystery. On the night of JonBenet's death, the only people known to be in the house with her were her parents, John and Patricia, and her older brother, Burke, who was 9 years old at the time. When the family woke up the morning after Christmas Day, Patricia, also known as Patsy, claimed to find a ransom note written in Sharpie. It demanded a ransom of $118,000 in exchange for JonBenet. The note was highly unusual as far as ransom notes go. First of all, the monetary amount named in the note precisely matched the amount awarded in a recent bonus of John's. That note was longer than most ransom notes and filled 3 pages. After searching the house, John found JonBenet's body. The Ramseys had woken up to a kidnapping and discovered a murder instead. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey has never been solved. Over the years, numerous suspects have been proposed, from her family members to some sort of mystery assailant that broke into the house. According to People in 2008, the district attorney wrote to John to inform him that he, Patsy, and Burke had been cleared of suspicion via DNA evidence. However, the DA that followed him, Stan Garnett, told People, "I didn't feel the exoneration was warranted based on the state of the evidence and the complexity of the case." Other theories point to the ransom note and the potential for a killer from outside the Ramsey family. One suspect was Michael Helgath, whose boots seemed to match a print found at the scene of the crime. However, Helgath died by suicide in 1997, and that particular trial went cold. Several individuals have attempted to confess to the crime, but no solid evidence has linked them to the murder. There are hopes that advances in DNA-based investigation may eventually lead to an answer, but it's entirely possible that the murder of John Benet will never be solved. Number 16. 8-Day Bride. Weddings are meant to be joyous occasions, a celebration of love, and the start of a lifelong commitment between two people swearing to cherish one another. But for some couples, till death do us part comes true far too soon. Jack and Christina Kettlewell were married in secret on May 12, 1947. Christina's family did not approve of the match and were even more concerned when Jack's best friend Ronnie accompanied the couple on their honeymoon. On May 17th, Christina and Jack moved into a cottage in Severn Falls, Ontario. 3 days later, only 8 days after the wedding, Christina was found in her pajamas, floating face down in 9 inches of river water. She had drowned. Behind her, the cottage was going up in flames. There were no visible wounds or burns on Christina's body to suggest a struggle or that she had been caught in the fire. Suspicion immediately fell on Ronnie, who had taken out life insurance policies on both Jack and Christina prior to their elopement. The plot thickens when Jack gives a statement to the police that suggests that he and Ronnie are lovers, and the tale only got more twisted from there. A suicide letter emerged, supposedly written from Christina to Ronnie, claiming that she had tried to kill herself with poison out of fear that she and Jack would never marry. There was another letter that grew more frantic, and finally a third letter written the day before her death. "Ronnie is in the boat outside somewhere," it said. "By the time he gets back, everything will be all over with. He must have been afraid something would happen because he is staying an extra day to ensure we return to Toronto with him." Jack's son Richard never believed this version of the story. He insisted that Ronnie had been the mastermind of a scheme to get rid of Christina. The jury in the case was unable to determine whether foul play was responsible for her death, and the case was left open. The only 3 people who can say for sure what happened that day are dead and buried now, and the truth is buried with them. Number 17. Roland T. Owen, aka Artemis Ogletree. On January 2, 1935, a man checked into room 1046 of the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. He gave the name Roland T. Owen and carried no luggage. He was in his mid-20s, approximately 5 foot 5 inches tall, and had dark hair and a scar over his left eyebrow. There was nothing especially remarkable about him. The next morning, the hotel staff received a call from his room reporting an injury. When they got there, Roland T. Owen was bound and bruised, lying naked on the bed. He was covered in cuts and other injuries consistent with a savage beating, and the room was littered with broken glass and overturned furniture. He was still alive and was taken to the hospital immediately. He refused to share any information about what had happened to him, but by the next day, he was dead. Shortly after, the police determined that Roland T. Owen was a fake name, and the home address he had given was actually the address of a vacant lot. Eventually, after his mother Ruby saw an article about the case, the mysterious dead man was identified as Artemis Ogletree. Strangely enough, Ruby had been receiving letters from her son, some that had been sent after his death. She'd already suspected something was wrong, as the letters had been typed on a typewriter and written in a style that sounded nothing like Artemis. But now she knew for sure. What she didn't know was who might have the reason to kill her son. Some investigators proposed that it might be related to an engagement that he had broken off. Others theorized that Ogletree had ties to the mafia. Nearly a century later, we still have no idea what exactly happened in that hotel room. There is something especially terrifying about the unknown. The world is filled with many horrors, many of which we can explain. Knowing the explanation doesn't make them less horrifying, but it provides some closure. The truth may always be just out of reach, but we'll never give up on trying to grasp it. Now check out Weirdest Unsolved Mysteries, or watch this video instead.